a quick show of hands, or maybe give me a thumbs up to this question. Who likes to eat? Right? We all like to eat. Everybody likes food. We all like food. We live in a culture that I think is serious about the food that we eat. We love having meals. We love eating. We've got an abundance of restaurants. There's cooking shows. I mean, if you like food, there's all kinds of ways to express that, right? Because we love food. In fact, we like food so much we've turned it into a competition. We've turned eating into competition. Don't believe me? I was online looking at some of the record eating trials, right? And there are certain foods that people hold world records for being able to eat the most of, right? Like I happened to check and see the world record for eating tacos. Our online minister, Michael Bird, he loves tacos. He would love this one. In 8 minutes, a guy named Joey Chestnut, you might recognize that name because he really is a professional eater. A guy named Joey Chestnut in 8 minutes ate 126 tacos. 8 minutes, world record. Or the world record for eating donuts, 55 of them in 8 minutes. Interestingly enough, held by the same guy. So we get that, eating things like that, hot dogs, we get consuming a lot of those. But there's some foods that we don't think about eating that people hold world records for eating, like this one, for Spam. The world record for eating Spam, 9.75 pounds of Spam from the can, eaten in 8 minutes by a guy named Jeffrey Esper. I don't know. I've eaten enough Spam when I was little. I can see eating that one. Here's the one I don't get. There's a world record for eating pickled beef tongue. You heard me right. Pickled beef tongue. 3 pounds and 3 ounces of it in 12 minutes by a guy named Dominic Cardo. Pickled beef tongue, right? So I figure some of you will be competing this Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, for your own eating contest, maybe within your family, wherever you're at. And just so you know, in case you're trying to beat the world record for eating pumpkin pie, 20 pounds, 13 ounces of it in 8 minutes by a guy named Matt Stoney. Did you catch that? 20 pounds, almost 21 pounds of pumpkin pie in 8 minutes. You got a long way to go this Thursday. As Americans, we love everything that has to do with food. And I've got really good news that eating is actually one of the best ways to carry out Jesus' mission. It has to do with food, and you eating it is a great way to carry out Jesus' mission. If you've got a Bible or a Bible app you can open, I want you to go to Matthew 9. We're going to be reading from there in just a minute. And I want to just say welcome back to our series. We're calling it Bless. It's about our mission of helping others follow Jesus. It's not just our church's mission statement. It's your mission. It's my mission. It's our mission. But unfortunately, we sometimes can be content with just hoping others follow Jesus instead of really helping others follow Jesus. And so we talked about a way of overcoming that is the bless strategy that we find in the Bible, that God from the very beginning, going all the way back to the book of Genesis, God has a plan for redeeming the world, winning the world back to Himself. And it was through people blessing others, people receiving a blessing so that they could bless other people. That's the idea. We've been blessed to bless others. Abraham was blessed to bless others. Jesus blessed to bless others. And you and I are the same thing. We're not blessed to hold on to the blessing. We're not blessed to admire and enjoy the blessing. We are blessed to be able to share it with others. That's the blessing strategy. And so we've been talking about some practices based upon the acrostic BLESS, B-L-E-S-S. And last week we talked about 2 of those practices. The B stands for begin with prayer, and the L stands for listen. Begin with prayer. That's a great place to start because it lets us ask questions like, who is it that God would want me to bless? I want to pray for that. I want to pray for the who. And then if I know who God wants me to bless, I want to pray for the how. How do you want me to bless them? So we begin with prayer, and then the L stands for listen. We simply pay attention, right? We looked at a story that is told about Jesus walking through Jericho, and a blind beggar calls out for his attention. And Jesus, in the midst of all the noise in the crowd, stops, and he hears the man, and he goes over to to him, and he looks at the man and says, "What do you want me to do?" And the man says, "I want to see." And Jesus healed him, caused him to see. Jesus didn't just make assumptions. Jesus didn't just perform a miracle. He listened to what the man had to say. And so we've learned about already some practices that we can do to bless, very practical things. But now we're going to move into some really hands-on type things. And so the E in the word bless stands for eat, right? It stands for eat. One of my favorite things, and likely one of your favorite things as well. In fact, when I think about it, some of my most favorite memories in life are around a dining room table or a kitchen table. Like I can think about my immediate family when my children were growing up, some of the times that we spent eating dinner together at night and talking about the events of the day. Or maybe as a child when I was growing up, Sunday lunch was a time where our family gathered, and usually it involved other people from church or people that had visited our church, and we gathered around in our dining room and we ate roast and baked potatoes and green beans. Every Sunday my mom fixed the same meal, and I can remember it vividly. Or maybe you're thinking about a holiday where your family was gathered together. Or maybe even for me, remembering times where our church family gathers together, like at our annual tailgate party and eating out in the backyard of our church together. I love those kinds of memories. Jesus understood this, right? When you think about the things that Jesus did during his time on this earth, we often want to go straight to the miracles, right? The time he walked on the water, the time he fed several thousand people, the time that he did something, amazing, or maybe we think about his teaching, or certainly we think about Jesus, we think about him dying on the cross. But have you ever considered that a big part of what Jesus did, how he blessed people, was by eating with them? In fact, a lot of his ministry centered around meals. Let me give you some examples of that. His very first miracle, performed at a wedding feast, fed 5,000 people out on a hillside in the country. He told parables about people holding big banquets. The night before he was crucified, he gathered around with his disciples, his closest followers, and shared a holiday meal. It was called Passover with his closest friends. After his resurrection, one of the things that we see him doing is on the beach of this lake, he cooks breakfast for some of his disciples. So many significant meals right there. Now, when you think about it, eating was a big deal in Jesus' culture. I mean, it wasn't just that Jesus did it, it was a big deal. And in our world where it can be so much easier because of our busy schedules to just grab some fast food through the drive-thru, it's hard for us to understand how central eating was to life back then. Eating with someone was a way that you associated with them. Eating with someone was an affirmation of that person's value and dignity and worth. Eating with someone showed that you loved and cared for them. Eating with someone meant you considered them as a part of your social class. There was almost an alliance through our eating. And so that's why it seems so outrageous to the religious leaders of Jesus' day when he ate with some of the people that he ate with. They were some of the most despised people of the day. Respectable people didn't do that. Respectable people didn't eat with people who weren't, right? They didn't eat with those kinds of people. But Jesus was guilty of it all day long, all the time. Good example of that is the story that we find in Matthew chapter 9. Matthew tells the story of himself being called by Jesus to become a follower of him. Matthew was a tax collector, and it's a pretty monumental change for him. I want you to pick up with me Matthew chapter 9, and let's read verse 9 and 10, okay? Matthew chapter 9, verse 9 and 10. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. And while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. Okay, so here's the story. You got a guy named Matthew. He's sitting at this tax collector's booth. It was It was strategically positioned at this particular place, close to the lake. It was a crossroads of trade routes, and so everybody that came by paid a tax, right? You paid a tax because you walked through. You paid a tax on the goods that you had. If you bought goods, you paid taxes on that. And so fishermen paid taxes because of the fish that they caught, and when they sold them, they paid taxes. I mean, this is a money-making scheme right here, and Matthew's a part of it. Jesus walks up to that tax collector's booth, and he looks at Matthew, and he says, "Follow me." And the very next picture that we have is of Jesus eating at Matthew's house with a whole lot of other people like Matthew, along with Jesus' disciples. Now, in Jesus' day, tax collectors were considered scum of the earth. They were despised. They were traitors of the people. And so this was a situation where for Jesus to call one of these tax collectors to be one of his disciples, I mean, it was scandalous at best, right? But it was amazing that Jesus would do that. And the very first thing that happens is Jesus is at his house. I mean, we're not talking about first thing happened being an orientation meeting. It's not a Bible study. It's not how to do discipleship. None of that. It is simply a meal. And who else is there? Well, the text says, many tax collectors and sinners. Now, sinners was kind of this catch-all derogatory term for people who weren't a part of the religious elite, or for people who had kind of an illicit lifestyle, like prostitutes. So anytime you saw the word sinner, it was likely that there's probably a prostitute there. So the picture here in Matthew 9 is Jesus eating with the most despised and looked down on people of the day. Okay, let's pick up the story again, beginning in verse 12. Verse 11. When the Pharisees saw this, so I'm eating at Matthew's house with other tax collectors, other sinners. When they saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. So go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Okay, so Jesus apparently overhears the comment that the Pharisees are making. These religious people, they're like, why does your rabbi, why does your teacher eat with these people? And Jesus just responds to them, right? I mean, he overhears what they're saying. And here's kind of in essence what they say, because the Pharisees, they knew their Bibles, right? That's what they were known for. And Jesus is saying, listen, you're so busy keeping the rules and the regulations that you're ignoring the poor people, the needy people, the vulnerable people. You may know what the Bible has to say, but you really don't know what it means, and you're certainly not following it. See, Jesus was on a mission with his life, and the Pharisees just didn't get it. They didn't understand. For them, it was, keeping the rules and showing up at the services, but for Jesus, it was a mission to people. Now, this wasn't the only time that Jesus was called out for doing something like this. Luke 7:34, Jesus responds to it one time when he says, "The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and you say, here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." Now, Jesus wasn't a glutton. That's somebody who overdoes it with food, right? And he wasn't a drunkard, right? He didn't overdo it when it came to wine or alcoholic drinks. But he was certainly guilty of being a friend to tax collectors and sinners. And he wasn't ashamed of that. It just got lumped in with all those sinful categories, right? So when we see Jesus in life, his life was that eating was integral to his mission. It was just a part of it. He blessed people by sharing meals with them. So understand this, sharing a meal is more than just eating together. It's more than just food. It's more than just sitting down and providing nourishment. Sharing a meal, when we do that, we're sharing conversation. When we share a meal, we're sharing connection. When we share a meal, we're sharing ourselves. That doesn't make it easier knowing that. It's still hard for us because we can think of all kinds of reasons why we can't possibly do that. We got all kinds of excuses. Let me give you 3 of them, okay? Excuse number 1. I don't like to have people in my home, okay? We don't like to have people in our home. It can be uncomfortable for some people. It can be a lot of work for some people. And quite honestly, your house is probably like my house. It's not on the cover of Southern Living, right? It's probably not that cute, everything. It's lived in. It's like my house. We live in it every day. We can't make it look pretty for when people come over. Listen, if you don't like to have people in your home, go meet some people out to eat. If you don't like to cook, call in pizza. What you have to eat or where you choose to eat it is not the most important thing. Don't make a big deal about that. What's important is with whom you're sharing the meal with. Don't make such a big deal about whether your house is decorated or all of those things. That's not the important thing, okay? Second excuse that we give. First one is I don't like to have people in my home. Second one is I don't know what to say. I don't know what we talk about. I don't know what the conversation would be like. And the truth is, many of us aren't used to entertaining guests, or maybe you're truly an introvert, and that's hard for you, and you're not sure how it would go. And I just want to say, quit worrying about what you'll say and think about what you can learn from people. Think about what you can learn from people. Have some questions ready to ask, like, where are you from? How'd you and your spouse meet? What do you do for fun? Remember, part of what we do is listen to people. We want to listen to the people that God puts in our lives. And so we don't get caught up on all those things. Let's listen. Here's the third thing. Third excuse. I don't have time. I just don't have time. In fact, we barely find time to have, meals with our immediate family. But here's a way to think about it. We already have eating built into our schedules every day. You're going to eat every day, multiple times a day. What would it look like if you just decided you were going to set aside a missional time each week for missional eating, okay? You're going to eat anyway. It isn't like you're cramming another thing into your schedule because you're already going to eat. With a little intentionality, it can become a regular rhythm of your life. In the book right here, right now, Alan Hirsch and Lance Ford say this: sharing meals together on a regular basis is one of the most sacred practices we can engage in as believers. If every Christian household regularly invited a stranger or a poor person into their home for a meal once a week, we would literally change the world by eating. So what if our homes, what if the restaurants in our community, the diners, the whatever, what if the coffee shops around here became hubs for missional eating and coffee drinking, for people connecting and listening and caring? I believe we would move beyond just hoping others follow Jesus to actually helping others follow Jesus. The E in bless is for eat. And the S, or at least the first S, is for serve. I want you to hear about this special group of servants, friends of mine that are a part of our church, and I want you to see a way in which they have found to serve.
Hi, I'm Cindy Rigney, and I'm one of the original quilters here at Cedar Ridge Christian Church with Natasha Wilson and Cindy Jones. We've been quilting for 25 plus years, and we'd like to show you some of the things we have done.
We make baby quilts for each family in Cedar Ridge that has their first child. They get a gift from the Cedar Ridge Quilters.
We also do stockings at Christmas time. We provide stockings for our Kids Zone for their foster care program. And they fill those and give them away to foster care families. We also support the Blue Star Mothers by supplying them with Christmas stockings, and this year we did 850 for them.
And we do quilts for the Kindness for Kaysen Foundation. And we donate those to the foundation and they distribute them to the families. If you'd like to join us and be a part of this ministry, we meet each Tuesday night at 6 o'clock in room 348.
I love these ladies and all the different organizations. You catch that? Multiple ways in which they're providing quilts, and man, it's something that they love to do. They want to do it already, and they're finding ways to serve people and serve our community with it. I think it's beautiful. You know, there is an unwritten rule in our world that says something like this: the higher you rise, the more power you have, the more wealth you have, then the more leverage you have to get people to serve you. All right? I mean, that's the general take of it, right? The more you have, the more resources you have, then you can get people to do things for you. But Jesus modeled a different way. He showed us what it's really like to bless the world. In fact, on this one particular occasion, it happens at a meal. And Jesus and his disciples are there to eat together at an event called Passover. It happens this particular meal they're going to do together is happening the night before Jesus would be crucified. But as everyone kind of reclined at the table getting ready for the meal to be served, Jesus does this absolutely surprising thing. He gets up. He takes off the kind of his outer robe. He wraps a towel around his waist. He pours water into a basin, and he begins methodically to wash his disciples' feet and then to dry them off with that towel. I want you to think about this. In that story, no one higher. There was no one with more power, no one with more wealth, and no one with more leverage. Yet what does Jesus do? He sets aside his crown and he picks up a servant's towel. Jesus didn't just perform an act of kindness, okay? Let's clarify here. This was not something that Jesus thought, I'm going to just do this so the guys will enjoy it. It wasn't just an act of kindness. By washing their feet, he assumed the lowest rung on the ladder. I mean, this was a job for the lowest servant in the household right here. I mean, we're talking first century, right? There's no paved roads. I mean, it's dirty, it's dusty, no paved roads, at least in this part of town. Hygiene is not the best. You know, I mean, people's feet would have just been gross, right? Can we just admit that? And then here they are at a meal. They are reclining at this meal. So basically, your feet are in somebody else's face and somebody else's feet are in your face while you're eating. That was why it was so important that when you went to somebody's house, somebody washed feet, right? Well, it didn't happen that day. Nobody agreed to do it. This is a guest house they're in. Nobody else is taking care of it. And so when everybody's there, nobody assuming the role, can you imagine the awkward silence when Jesus starts doing it? And people are beginning to thinking to themselves, somebody else should have been doing this. I'm not doing this. Maybe I should have done this. And remember, this is a culture of honor. I mean, people of great power and honor, they didn't do certain things. And Jesus does something different. Of course, the disciples didn't know it at the time, what we know now. And that is just a few hours after this, Jesus, in a different act of humility and service, would set aside his crown, this time for a cross. And he would take on our shame and take on our sin, and in one act make us right with God. What Jesus did by washing the disciples' feet was a statement. In fact, after he did it, he said this: "Now that I've washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet." It's a message for all of us, and the message is simple. It's our turn to serve the way we have been served by Jesus. What you see Jesus do, that's what we do. So in a world that believes the higher you rise, the more resources you have, the more wealth you accumulate, you leverage that to get people to serve you, instead, Jesus says, whoever wants to become the greatest among you must first be your servant. Whoever wants to be the first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. You know, if you and I are going to carry out the mission of Jesus, if we're going to move beyond just hoping people follow Jesus to actually helping them follow Jesus. We've got to live out the blessed practices. And so what happens is after we begin with prayer and we are seeking the who and we're seeking the how, and after we begin to listen to people and we sit down and eat with them, we're going to start to see ways in which we can serve them. Practical ways that God can help me to meet their physical needs or their emotional needs or relational needs, maybe even spiritual needs, and ways of which that He's called me to bless them. So last week we talked about a card. We handed it out in our services, and I encourage you, if you were watching online, to maybe even just write it down. If you'll call the office or email me or text us or something, we'll make sure you get one of these cards. But the simple thing would be just to write some names down. And this is the idea, to think about the people and the places that you've been called to bless, and to begin to pray for them, begin to put some real feet to this. And so as God begins to reveal to you who are the people and places, you begin to write those names down. Maybe you have a name on there, maybe you have a couple of names, maybe you have a place. You don't know the people yet, but you've got the place. That may be with a neighbor, or maybe it's a coworker, or a family member, or a friend. And the question that we want to ask today about the people that we're praying for and people that we're looking ultimately to listen or to eat with is, when I'm with that person, again, coworker, family, friend, neighbor, when I'm with them, am I wearing a crown or am I holding a servant's towel? Am I wearing a crown or am I holding a servant towel? And maybe you need to lay down your crown. Maybe for you, it's to find a way in which you can serve them. Let's ask God to give us opportunities. Keep praying over your card. Let me just encourage you to buy in, to own this thing. It'd be so easy just to watch this, and it's another thing. I know I need to do it, and you're going to turn it off, you're going to hit pause, and you're not going to think about it again today. What if you stopped right now and prayed and said, God, who is it that you are calling me to bless? God, would you put an opportunity right in front of me that I will not mistake it? And let me begin with prayer. Let me start to listen. Find a time to eat with them and a way in which I can serve them. Pray with me. Father, thank you for teaching us how to bless other people. We thank you that you blessed us. You called us to be a blessing. And so, Father, we don't want to hold that blessing to ourselves. We want to share it with others. And Father, we can come up with so many excuses, so many reasons why we can't do the things you've called us to do. We've talked about them today. And I pray, Father, you would help us to see those for what they really are. Would you help us just to be obedient to you, to apply the blessing strategy to the people that you've already put around us? Would you help us to bless others? In Jesus' name, amen.